My name is Joyce, and at 65 years old, I never imagined my own daughter Allison would scream in my face to pay rent or get out of my house. Yes, my house, the home I owned outright. She had no idea that a week later I would sell that beloved house for $840,000 without telling her. When the eviction notices started arriving, her panicked phone call came right on schedule. But my response left her completely stunned. I wonder, where are you watching this from today? If my story resonates with you, please hit that like button and subscribe to join our community of survivors. Now let me take you back to where it all began. Frank and I built our life in a quiet suburb of Ann Arbor, Michigan. He was a brilliant structural engineer who could fix anything, and I spent 32 years as the elementary school librarian at Lakeside Elementary. We saved every penny for almost a decade before building our dream home in 1987. Frank designed most of it himself, a beautiful 4-bedroom colonial with large windows that let in streams of natural light and a wrap-around porch where we spent countless summer evenings watching fireflies dance across our lawn. This house will tell our story, Frank used to say, as he carefully sanded each banister spindle by hand. And it did. Every corner held memories. The slight dent in the kitchen doorframe marked the height of our daughter Allison each birthday. The oak tree in the backyard grew from a sapling we planted when she was born. The slightly uneven floorboard in the hallway squeaked when you stepped on it just right, our natural alarm system when Allison tried sneaking out as a teenager. For 30 years, that house witnessed our joys and sorrows. It sheltered us through blizzards and heat waves. It welcomed friends and family for holiday gatherings and summer barbecues. It was where Frank and I grew old together, at least, until pancreatic cancer took him from us 8 years ago. Allison had always been a daddy's girl. She had his quick wit and his dark wavy hair, and growing up they were inseparable. Every Saturday morning they would head to the hardware store together, Frank teaching her how to use tools and build things. I still remember her proud smile when she showed me the birdhouse they made together when she was just 9 years old. We were close too in our own way. I taught her to bake using my mother's recipes, and we spent countless hours reading together. She would curl up next to me on our oversized armchair, and we would travel to magical worlds through the pages of books. As a librarian, I had access to all the best children's literature, and Allison developed a love for reading that continued into adulthood. After college, Allison moved to Chicago for work. She visited regularly, calling multiple times a week. But everything changed when she met Troy 5 years ago. Their relationship moved at lightning speed. Within 3 months, they were engaged, and they married 6 months later in a small ceremony that felt rushed and impersonal. Frank had been gone for 3 years by then, and I tried to be supportive despite my reservations. Troy worked in sales but never seemed to stay with one company for long. The corporate world just doesn't understand my potential, he would explain when another job fell through. He always had big ideas and schemes that never quite materialized into anything substantial. I kept my concerns to myself, wanting to respect Allison's choices. When Allison called me last year, her voice tight with stress, explaining they had been evicted from their apartment due to unpaid rent, my heart sank. Apparently, Troy had convinced her to invest their savings in a friend's startup that promptly failed. They had nowhere to go and no money for a security deposit on a new place. It would just be temporary, Mom, Allison assured me. 3 months tops until we get back on our feet. How could I refuse my only child? My 3-bedroom house felt too big for just me anyway. I had been rattling around in it since Frank passed, using only about half the space. I told her they could stay in the guest bedroom and use the finished basement as a living area. We agreed they would pay $300 monthly as a token rent, not because I needed the money, but to maintain healthy boundaries. The first few weeks went smoothly. Allison helped with cooking and cleaning, and Troy fixed a leaky faucet in the downstairs bathroom. They kept their things mostly in their designated spaces, and we would sometimes watch movies together in the evenings. But I couldn't help noticing how Troy would look around the house with calculating eyes, commenting on the wasted space and suggesting improvements that sounded more like takeovers. My home truly was beautiful. The large kitchen with granite countertops that Frank had installed as an anniversary gift. The sunroom where my orchids thrived. The master bedroom with its bay window overlooking the garden I had lovingly tended for decades. The built-in bookshelves in the living room, filled with volumes collected throughout our lives. This was not just a house. It was the physical manifestation of the life Frank and I had built together. Every inch held memories I treasured. I had no idea then that soon I would be forced to choose between preserving those memories and preserving my dignity. 6 months turned into a year, with no mention of moving out. What had started as a temporary arrangement began to feel permanent, but not in a way that brought comfort. Gradually, almost imperceptibly at first, I started feeling like a guest in my own home rather than its owner. It began with small things. Troy converted my garage into what he called his innovation headquarters. Without asking, he moved my gardening supplies to a corner and took over the space with computers, whiteboards, and boxes of products for his latest business idea, selling specialty coffee online. My car, which Frank had always insisted should be protected from Michigan's harsh winters, now sat in the driveway collecting snow and ice. "The garage is just sitting empty most of the time," Troy explained when I expressed concern. "We need to maximize the utility of every square foot in this place." This place. Not my home. This place. Then came the redecorating. I returned from a weekend visiting my sister Margaret to find the living room completely rearranged. My comfortable worn sofa that Frank and I had chosen together had been pushed to an awkward corner, replaced by a sleek leather sectional I later discovered they had purchased on credit. "We thought you'd love it," Mom Allison exclaimed. "This room needed a modern update." When I mentioned that I hadn't been consulted, Allison rolled her eyes. "You're so resistant to change. This looks so much better." The basement, which had been their designated space, expanded upward like an invasive plant. Their belongings migrated to the main floor, then the second floor. My sewing room was converted into Troy's temporary office when he claimed he couldn't concentrate in the basement. My reading nook in the sunroom was dismantled to make space for Allison's exercise equipment. The late-night parties began about 8 months into their stay. I would lie awake at 11 midnight, sometimes 1 in the morning, listening to laughter and music floating up from downstairs. The first few times I mentioned that the noise kept me from sleeping. "You go to bed so early," Mom Allison said dismissively. "Most people are still wide awake at 10:30. Even having my own friends over became complicated. When my book club gathered in the dining room one Wednesday evening, Troy made a point of walking through, repeatedly sighing loudly each time. "Could you ladies keep it down?" he finally asked, though our conversation had been barely above a whisper. "I'm trying to focus on some important business calls." The next day, Allison suggested that perhaps I should find another location for my monthly book club meetings. "Troy works from home now," she explained. "He needs quiet to make his calls." The rent payments, already token in amount, became sporadic, then stopped entirely around month 9 of their stay. When I gently reminded Allison, she brushed it off. "We're family, Mom. Do you really need $300? Troy's business is at a critical investment stage. Once it takes off, we'll pay you back everything." I shared my growing concerns with my sister Margaret during our weekly phone calls. "Joyce, you need to put your foot down," Margaret urged. "They're taking advantage of your kindness." But confrontation had never been my strong suit. Frank had always handled the difficult conversations in our marriage. Without him, I found myself retreating, giving in, trying to keep the peace at the cost of my own comfort. Then came the whispered conversation I wasn't meant to hear. I had gone upstairs early one evening, but realized I'd left my reading glasses in the kitchen. As I descended the stairs, I heard Troy and Allison talking in hushed tones. "Your mom doesn't need all this space," Troy was saying. "She should just sign the house over to us and move into a senior apartment." "I don't know." Allison sounded uncertain. "This is her home." "She's 65, Troy continued. "Managing a house this size is too much for someone her age. We'd be doing her a favor. Besides, think about our future kids. They deserve to grow up in a house like this, not some cramped apartment." I froze on the stairs, my heart pounding. Was this their plan all along, to push me out of my own home? The home Frank and I had saved for, built, loved. The home where we had raised Allison. I crept back upstairs without my glasses, lying awake for hours, feeling betrayed and increasingly isolated. Over the following weeks, I noticed how Troy would make comments seemingly innocent but pointed about how I was too old for such a big house, how the stairs must be challenging for me, how much simpler my life would be in a smaller place. I wasn't imagining things. They were slowly trying to edge me out, making me feel incapable and unwelcome in my own home. And most heartbreaking of all, my daughter was complicit. The morning everything changed was deceptively ordinary. A Sunday in early October with sunshine streaming through the kitchen windows and the maple tree in the backyard blazing with autumn colors. I had woken early and made a pot of coffee, enjoying the quiet house before Allison and Troy emerged. Around 9:30 they came downstairs. Troy immediately went to pour himself coffee, not acknowledging my presence. Allison gave me a quick peck on the cheek before joining him at the table. I had made blueberry pancakes a Sunday tradition from Allison's childhood, but they sat untouched as the couple scrolled through their phones. I had rehearsed this conversation all week, practicing what I would say, trying to find words that would be firm but not confrontational. 3 months had passed since their last rent payment, and while the money itself wasn't crucial to me, the principle mattered. The boundaries needed to be respected. "I made your favorite pancakes," I said, trying to start on a positive note. "Thanks," Allison replied without looking up from her phone. "Maybe later." I took a deep breath. "I wanted to talk to you both about the rent." Troy's head snapped up, his expression immediately defensive. "What about it?" "It's been 3 months since the last payment," I said, keeping my voice level. "We had an agreement about the $300 monthly." "Seriously," Troy scoffed. "You're nickel and diming us. After everything we've done around here." My hands trembled slightly as I set my coffee cup down. "What exactly have you done, Troy?" "Are you kidding me?" He gestured broadly. "I fixed the porch step. I updated your ancient thermostat. I've been maintaining this place while you just sit around reading your books." The injustice of his statement stung. I had continued to pay every utility bill, buy most of the groceries, clean the common areas, and maintain the yard, all while being gradually pushed into an increasingly smaller portion of my own home. "This is my house," I said quietly. "I've maintained it for 30 years. Allison, who had been silent, finally looked up. "Mom, Troy has a point. We've contributed a lot here." "I'm not saying you haven't helped," I clarified. "But we had an agreement about rent, and I think it's reasonable to expect that agreement to be honored." Troy pushed his chair back from the table with enough force to make the dishes rattle. "You know what? This is exactly the problem with your generation. You think everything should be handed to you. You've had this house forever. You don't even have a mortgage payment. Meanwhile, we're trying to build our lives from scratch in an economy your generation ruined." His voice had risen to a near shout, and I found myself shrinking back. This wasn't how I had wanted the conversation to go. "Troy, please lower your voice," I said. "I'm just asking about our agreement." "Our agreement," he mimicked in a high voice. "Listen to yourself. So entitled." Allison finally intervened, but not in the way I had hoped. She stood up, placing her hands on the table, leaning toward me with an expression I had never seen directed at me before, a mixture of contempt and anger that made her look like a stranger. "Enough, Mom," she shouted, her voice echoing in the kitchen. "Either pay your share for living here or get out." The words hit me like a physical blow. Pay my share, get out of my own home. Troy smirked, adding, "This is our house now too, Joyce. We live here. We have rights." I sat stunned, unable to form words, as my own daughter continued her tirade. "Mom, be realistic. You're getting older. You can't maintain this place. You should be grateful we're here to help. If anything, you should be paying us for all the improvements and care we provide." The room seemed to tilt around me. My chest tightened, and for a moment I worried I might be having a heart attack. But it wasn't my heart failing. It was my heart breaking. My own daughter, the baby I had carried, the child I had raised, the person I loved most in this world, was treating me with such disrespect, such cruelty. Without another word, I stood up, my legs unsteady beneath me. I walked out of the kitchen, up the stairs, and into my bedroom, closing the door behind me. I could hear Troy and Allison continuing to talk downstairs, their voices animated but too muffled to make out the words. Not that I needed to hear them. The message had been delivered with painful clarity. I sat on my bed, the bed Frank and I had shared for decades, and allowed myself 10 minutes to cry. Just 10 minutes. Then I wiped my eyes, pulled out a suitcase from the closet, and began packing essentials. Clothes for a week. Toiletries. Medications. My jewelry box containing my wedding ring and the pearl necklace Frank had given me on our 20th anniversary. A framed photo of the three of us when Allison was 10. My e-reader loaded with books. As I packed, I moved around the bedroom that had been my sanctuary, touching familiar objects, saying goodbye. The quilt my grandmother had made. The watercolor painting of Lake Michigan that Frank and I had bought on our honeymoon. The view from the window of the garden I had tended for decades. When the suitcase was full, I took one last look around, then wheeled it quietly down the stairs. Allison and Troy had moved to the living room and were watching something on television, laughing as if nothing had happened, as if they hadn't just shattered my world. Neither looked up as I walked past them to the front door. "I'll be staying somewhere else for a while," I said, my voice steadier than I felt. "I think we all need some space." Allison glanced up briefly. "Drama isn't necessary, Mom. Just accept that things change." I didn't respond. I simply walked out the door, loaded my suitcase into my car, and drove away from the home I had loved for 30 years, tears blurring my vision as I navigated familiar streets that suddenly felt foreign. I checked into a hotel 5 miles away, a mid-range chain with clean rooms and free breakfast. Sitting on the edge of the unfamiliar bed, surrounded by generic hotel decor, I stared at the wall for hours, replaying the confrontation in my mind. The look on my daughter's face, the contempt in her voice, the casual cruelty. Sleep eluded me that night as I considered my options. I owned the house outright, that much was certain. But did I want to fight to stay in a place where I was clearly unwelcome? Did I want to force my way back into a situation that had become so toxic? And most painfully, did I want to continue living with the daily reminder that my own now pupil daughter valued my home more than she valued me? By morning, I knew what I needed to do. It would be the hardest decision I had made since agreeing to discontinue treatment when Frank's cancer spread. But sometimes the most painful choices are the ones that ultimately set us free. My first call Monday morning was to Barbara Johnson, a friend from my book club who happened to be a real estate attorney. We met for coffee at a small cafe far from my neighborhood where I was unlikely to run into anyone who knew me. "Joyce, what they're doing is elder abuse," Barbara said firmly after I explained the situation. "You own that house. Your name is on the deed. They have no legal right to force you out or take over." I know I sighed, staring into my cooling coffee. But knowing my rights and enforcing them are two different things. I don't want to call the police on my own daughter. Barbara reached across the table and squeezed my hand. "What do you want to do?" The question hung in the air between us. What did I want? I wanted my old life back. I wanted my daughter to respect me. I wanted Frank by my side, helping me navigate this nightmare. But none of those things were possible. "I think I want to sell the house." I finally said the words, both painful and liberating. "Start fresh somewhere they can't manipulate me." Barbara nodded. "I think that's wise, Joyce. And legally, you're completely within your rights. You don't even need to inform them until you have a buyer, since they're not on the deed." She referred me to Sandra Thompson, a realtor she trusted, who specialized in quick, discreet sales. Sandra met me at Barbara's office that same afternoon, her energy and confidence immediately reassuring. "The market in your neighborhood is extremely hot right now," Sandra explained, pulling up recent sales on her tablet. 4-bedroom colonials in your area are selling within days, often above asking price. Given the upgrades you've mentioned and the size of your lot, I think we could list at $750,000 and expect multiple offers. The number took my breath away. Frank and I had built the house for just under $200,000 in 1987. The idea that it was now worth nearly 4 times that amount seemed surreal. "How quickly could we sell?" I asked. "If we list on Wednesday, hold an open house this weekend, we could have offers by Monday. We'd need to coordinate showings when your daughter and son-in-law aren't home." I explained that they both usually left the house between 8 and 9 in the morning and returned around 6. Sandra suggested we schedule all showings during those hours. "What about my belongings?" I asked. "Pack what's truly irreplaceable now," Sandra advised. "We can include a rent-back clause that gives you time to remove everything else after closing or negotiate that the buyers purchase some of the furniture if you're downsizing." Over the next 2 days, I returned to the house while Allison and Troy were at work. I moved quietly, efficiently, removing family photos, important documents, irreplaceable keepsakes, and family heirlooms. I stored everything in a small storage unit I rented near my hotel. Allison texted once asking when I was coming home, but I responded vaguely that I was taking some time to think. Sandra listed the house on Wednesday, describing it as a meticulously maintained colonial in desirable lakeside estates perfect for a growing family. The professional photographer she hired captured the morning light streaming through the windows, the mature landscaping, the spacious rooms. Looking at the listing photos, I saw my home through a stranger's eyes and realized how truly beautiful it was. The open house on Saturday was scheduled for 11 to 3. I parked down the street, watching as couples and families streamed in and out. Young parents with children, empty nesters looking to upgrade, a few single professionals, all of them imagining their lives in my home, just as Frank and I had done 3 decades earlier. Sandra called that evening, her voice excited. Joyce, the response was incredible. We already have 5 serious buyers interested. I think we should set a deadline for offers on Monday at noon. The weekend passed in a blur of anxiety and anticipation. I avoided Allison's increasingly irritated texts asking when I was returning. On Monday, Sandra called precisely at 1:30. "Joyce, are you sitting down?" she asked. "We received 7 offers. 6 are above asking price. The highest is $840,000, all cash with a 2-week close, and the option for you to rent back for up to 30 days to remove your belongings." $840,000. The number seemed impossible, almost obscene. For a moment I felt guilty, as if I were betraying Frank by selling our dream for such a sum. But then I remembered his words. Whenever we faced a difficult decision, "We built this life together, Joyce. Whatever choices you make after I'm gone, I trust you to do what's right for you." I accepted the offer, signing the paperwork in Barbara's office that afternoon. The buyers, a surgeon and her professor husband with 3 children, seemed like good people who would love the house as we had. The inspection went smoothly, with only minor issues to address. The closing was scheduled for 2 weeks later. During those 2 weeks, I found a beautiful 2-bedroom condo in a secure building downtown. It had large windows overlooking a small park, hardwood floors, and a modern kitchen. The building had a doorman, underground parking, and a small fitness center. At $400,000, it was well within my budget, even after paying Sandra's commission and setting aside money for taxes. I used some of the proceeds to furnish my new place, choosing pieces that suited me perfectly, not compromising with anyone else's taste. A plush sofa in a rich blue that reminded me of Lake Michigan. Bookshelves built to my specifications. A dining table just the right size for me, and a few close friends. A comfortable bed with a luxury mattress. As the closing date approached, my emotions swung wildly between grief and exhilaration. Each room in the house held memories I was preparing to leave behind. The kitchen, where I had taught Allison to make Christmas cookies. The living room where Frank and I had slow danced on our anniversary. The treehouse in the backyard that Frank had built when Allison was 7. But each memory was now tainted by the recent pain, by Allison's betrayal, by the knowledge that my own daughter valued my home more than she valued me. The house had become a symbol of all I had lost, not just Frank, but the loving relationship I thought I had with my daughter. The closing took place on a Thursday morning. I signed my name dozens of times, formally transferring ownership of the house that had been the center of my life for 30 years. When it was done, Barbara handed me a copy of the wire transfer confirmation, $840,000 minus closing costs, and commission had been deposited into my account. As we walked out of the title company office, I expected to feel devastated. Instead, I felt lighter, as if I had set down a heavy burden I hadn't realized I was carrying. The house had become a battleground, a source of pain and conflict. Now it belonged to someone else, and I was free to build a new life on my own terms. "What now?" Barbara asked as we stood in the parking lot. "Now," I said with a small smile, "I wait for the new owners to send the eviction notice." My new condo quickly began to feel like home. The space was smaller but perfectly suited to my needs. No creaky stairs, no drafty windows, no memories lurking around every corner. I arranged my books on the new shelves, hung a few cherished artworks, and placed Frank's photo on my bedside table. Within a week, it felt more like home than my house had in the years since Allison and Troy moved in. I had negotiated a 2-week rent-back period with the new owners, meaning Allison and Troy could legally remain in the house for 14 days after closing before the new owners took possession. I did not inform them of the sale. According to Barbara, I had no legal obligation to do so since they were effectively month-to-month tenants with no lease, and the new owners would handle the formal eviction process. Those 2 weeks passed quietly. I focused on settling into my new life, joining a yoga class in my building, exploring nearby restaurants, and discovering a lovely independent bookstore within walking distance. I made a point of meeting my neighbors, mostly professionals, and other empty nesters, all of whom respected boundaries and privacy, in a way that felt refreshing after a year of invasion. 13 days after closing exactly as expected, my phone rang. Allison's name flashed on the screen. For a moment, I considered letting it go to voicemail, but I took a deep breath and answered. Mom, Allison's voice was frantic. Someone just came to the house and gave us an eviction notice. They're saying we have to be out by the end of the month. They claim they bought the house, but that's impossible. What's going on? I sat down on my new sofa, gathering my thoughts before responding. The notice is legitimate, Allison. I sold the house. The silence on the other end was so profound, I wondered if the call had dropped. Then came her voice, stunned and disbelieving. You can't sell the house? We live here. It was my house to sell, I said calmly. My name was on the deed. I owned it outright. But, where are we supposed to go? Her voice cracked. We can't find a place in 2 weeks. We don't have money for a security deposit. I imagine you're feeling what I felt when you told me to pay rent or get out of my own home. Another long silence. Then muffled sounds as if she had covered the phone. I could hear her explaining to Troy, his voice rising in the background. Let me talk to her, Troy demanded, and suddenly his voice was clear, having grabbed the phone. What the hell, Joyce? You can't do this. We'll sue you. This is illegal. It's perfectly legal, I replied, my voice steady despite my racing heart. I owned the house. I had the right to sell it. The new owners are giving you more notice than most landlords would after learning you haven't been paying rent. We have tenant rights, Troy shouted. We've established residency. Yes, you do have certain rights. The new owners are respecting those by giving you formal notice. But make no mistake, Troy. They own the house now, and they intend to move in with their 3 children. If you try to fight this, they will involve the courts, and that will leave an eviction on your record, making it even harder to rent in the future. Troy unleashed a stream of profanity that made me wince and hold the phone away from my ear. In the background, I could hear Allison crying. Let me speak to my daughter, I said firmly when he paused for breath. You've destroyed our lives, he spat. But I heard the phone being passed back to Allison. Mom, she sobbed. How could you do this? Where are you even staying? I bought a condo downtown, and I did this because you and Troy made it clear I was no longer welcome in my own home. You demanded I pay rent to live in the house I owned. We were upset. People say things when they're upset. You didn't have to sell our house. It was never your house, Allison. That's what you and Troy never understood. It was my home filled with 30 years of memories with your father, and you treated it and me with complete disrespect. She continued crying, but her next words surprised me. Please, Mom. We need help. Can we stay with you until we find a place? Just for a little while. The old Joyce would have said yes immediately, putting her own comfort aside to help her daughter even after such betrayal. But I was no longer that Joyce. No, Allison. My condo is too small, and frankly I need space from both of you. But I will meet with you alone to talk about this situation. No, Troy. He won't like that, she said quietly. That's not my concern. If you want to meet, it will be just us. Tomorrow at 2, the Blue Teapot Cafe on Main Street. After a moment's hesitation, she agreed. We ended the call, and I sat staring out my window at the park below, watching children play on the swings. I felt a complex mixture of sadness and vindication. This confrontation had been inevitable since the moment I decided to sell, but living through it was still painful. My phone buzzed repeatedly over the next hour as Troy left increasingly angry voicemails, threatening lawsuits, claiming squatters' rights, and even suggesting he would report me for elder abandonment. I blocked his number after the 5th call. Allison texted once confirming our meeting for the following day. That night I barely slept, rehearsing what I would say to my daughter, wondering if there was any path forward for our relationship. By morning I knew only that I would speak my truth and set clear boundaries. The rest would depend on Allison. I arrived at the Blue Teapot 20 minutes early, selecting a quiet table in the corner with a good view of the door. The cafe was charming with mismatched vintage teacups, local art on the walls, and the soothing scent of freshly baked scones. I ordered a pot of Earl Grey and tried to calm my nerves. At exactly 2 o'clock, Allison walked in. I barely recognized my daughter. Her usually meticulous appearance had given way to unwashed hair pulled into a messy ponytail, dark circles under her eyes, and rumpled clothes that looked slept in. She spotted me and approached slowly, sliding into the chair across from me. "You look terrible," I said, not unkindly. "We were up all night trying to figure out what to do," she replied, her voice hoarse. "Troy wanted to come, but I told him you wouldn't talk to us if he did." The waitress approached and Allison ordered coffee. We sat in uncomfortable silence until her drink arrived. "How could you sell the house without even telling us?" she finally asked, her tone accusatory despite her vulnerable appearance. I took a sip of tea, gathering my thoughts. "Allison, I want you to listen carefully. For the past year, I have been systematically pushed out of my own home, the home I built with your father, the home where we raised you." "That's not true," she protested. "We were just living there." "Let me finish," I said firmly. "When you first asked to move in, I welcomed you with open arms. It was supposed to be temporary, 3 to 6 months at most. You agreed to pay a token rent, not because I needed the money, but to maintain appropriate boundaries." I recounted specific incidents: Troy taking over the garage, Allison redecorating without consulting me, the late-night parties, the complaints when I had friends over the gradual expansion of their belongings throughout the house. "You stopped paying even that small rent after 9 months, dismissing my reminders. I overheard Troy telling you I should sign the house over to you and move into a senior apartment. I heard you considering it." Allison looked down at her coffee. "He was just talking. We wouldn't have forced you out." "But you did force me out, Allison. When I politely asked about the overdue rent, you screamed at me to pay my share or get out. Those were your exact words. To your mother, in the home I owned outright." "I was frustrated," she mumbled. "Troy had been going on about how unfair it was that we struggled while you had this big house to yourself. And instead of recognizing that as entitlement, you embraced it. You chose his resentment over your mother's generosity." Allison's eyes filled with tears. "So this is punishment, selling the house from under us." "No," I said gently. "This is self-preservation. I realized I couldn't continue in a situation where I was devalued and disrespected daily, where my own daughter saw me as nothing more than an obstacle to her husband's desire for my property." "That's not how I saw you," she protested weakly. "What would your father think of how you've treated me?" I asked quietly. The question hung in the air between us. Allison's face crumpled and she covered her mouth with her hand, tears flowing freely now. "Dad would be so disappointed in me," she whispered. "Yes," I agreed. "He would. Your father valued respect above almost everything else. He taught you to respect others' property, others' feelings, others' boundaries. Somewhere along the way, you forgot those lessons." For several minutes, Allison simply cried while I sipped my tea, giving her space to process. When she finally looked up, something had shifted in her expression. The defensive anger had given way to something that looked like genuine remorse. "I didn't see it," she said, wiping her eyes. "I didn't see how we were treating you. Troy kept saying we deserved better, that you had it easy, that you were being selfish, not helping us more. And I started believing him." "Do you remember your 10th birthday?" I asked. "When you wanted that expensive electronic pet that everyone had?" She nodded, looking confused by the change of subject. "Your father and I couldn't afford it that year. We'd had unexpected medical bills. You threw a tantrum saying all the other parents bought them for their kids, that we were mean and didn't love you. Do you remember what your father told you?" He said, Allison's voice caught, he said, "that wanting something doesn't entitle you to have it. That demanding things from people who love you is the quickest way to damage that love." Exactly. Troy wanted my house. He convinced you that wanting it entitled you to have it. And in the process, you damaged our relationship severely. I pulled out my phone and showed her texts from my sister Margaret, from my friend Barbara, even from her own cousin Jennifer, all of whom had witnessed her and Troy's behavior toward me over the past year, all expressing concern about how I was being treated in my own home. I didn't realize how bad it had gotten, Allison admitted, her shoulders slumping. Or maybe I didn't want to see it. Troy can be very convincing when he wants something. Troy is a grown man who convinced my daughter to mistreat her mother for material gain, I said bluntly. That speaks to his character, but it also speaks to the choices you've made. Allison broke down completely then, sobbing, in a way I hadn't seen since she was a child. Other cafe patrons glanced our way, but I focused entirely on my daughter, watching as the full weight of her actions finally hit her. "I'm so sorry, Mom," she managed between sobs. "I'm so sorry. I don't know how things got so twisted. I don't know how I became this person." I reached across the table and took her hand. "The question now is, who do you want to be going forward?" She looked up, eyes red and swollen. "I don't even know anymore. Everything's falling apart. Not just with you. Troy and I have been fighting constantly. He's angry all the time. Nothing I do is right. It's like living with a ticking bomb." This was new information, though not entirely surprising. "Allison, is your relationship with Troy healthy?" She stared at her coffee for a long moment. "No," she finally admitted. "It hasn't been for a while. Maybe it never was. He can be so charming and exciting when things are going his way, but when they're not." She trailed off, unconsciously rubbing her wrist. "Has he hurt you?" I asked sharply, noticing the gesture. "Not exactly. He grabs me sometimes when he's angry. Leaves bruises. He says it's my fault for walking away during arguments." My heart sank. The situation was worse than I had imagined. "That's physical abuse, Allison. It's not acceptable, ever." "I know," she whispered. "I've been thinking about leaving. Jennifer said I could stay with her for a while, but I've been scared to make the move." "The eviction might be a blessing in disguise then," I suggested gently. "A clean break." She nodded slowly. "Maybe you're right. Maybe this is the push I needed." She looked up at me, her eyes vulnerable. "I really am sorry, Mom, for everything. I don't expect you to forgive me right away, but I hope someday you can." "I hope so too," I said honestly. "It will take time to rebuild trust, but you're my daughter and I love you. That hasn't changed, even when your behavior hurt me deeply." We talked for another hour, making plans for her to move her personal belongings to Jennifer's apartment over the next few days. I agreed to help financially, but only for her, not for Troy. She would need to tell him about her decision to leave, and I insisted she not do it alone but have Jennifer present for safety. As we prepared to leave the cafe, Allison asked hesitantly, "Will I be able to see your new place sometime?" "Eventually," I said. "When we've both had time to heal and establish new, healthier patterns. This isn't the end of our relationship, Allison, but it is the end of the old dynamic." She nodded, understanding the boundary I was setting. As we hugged goodbye, I felt a small spark of hope that perhaps from these painful ashes, something new and better might eventually emerge. 6 months can change everything. As I arrange fresh flowers in a crystal vase that once belonged to my grandmother, I reflect on how far I've come since that fateful Sunday morning when my daughter screamed at me to pay rent or get out of my own home. My condo has become a true sanctuary. The morning light streams through east-facing windows, illuminating my collection of houseplants that thrive on the wide windowsills. My bookshelves are organized just as I like them, with favorite novels easily accessible and new discoveries waiting to be explored. The walls are painted in soothing shades of blue and green that remind me of the Michigan lakeshore where Frank and I spent so many happy summers. The journey to this peace wasn't easy. The first month after selling the house was a blur of conflicting emotions. Grief for the home I had loved, anger at how I had been treated, worry about Allison, guilt about whether I had made the right choice. But gradually, with time and the help of a skilled therapist named Dr. Harriet Coleman, I found my way to acceptance and even gratitude. "What you experienced was a form of elder abuse," Dr. Coleman told me during our second session. "Financial exploitation and psychological manipulation are common tactics, especially with family members. You showed tremendous courage by recognizing it and taking action to protect yourself." Those words were a revelation. I had been raised to believe that family always comes first, that a mother's role is to sacrifice for her children. But Dr. Coleman helped me understand that healthy love includes boundaries, that allowing myself to be mistreated wasn't helping Allison become a better person. You model what you'll accept, she explained. By refusing to accept disrespect, you're actually teaching your daughter an important lesson about healthy relationships. Week by week, I rebuilt my sense of self-worth. I joined a book club at the local library, making new friends who knew nothing of my past struggles. I volunteered at a literacy program, helping adults learn to read, finding purpose in sharing my librarian skills. I took a watercolor class, discovering a creative outlet I had never explored during my busy years of working and parenting. Most importantly, I learned to value myself enough to speak up when something felt wrong, to express my needs clearly without apology, to set boundaries with confidence. The woman who had fled her own home in tears was gradually replaced by someone stronger, wiser, and more authentically herself. As for Allison, her path has been more complicated but ultimately hopeful. She did move in with Jennifer that week, taking only her personal belongings and leaving Troy to deal with the eviction. He reacted with predictable rage, but with Jennifer's boyfriend present for safety, Allison was able to make a clean break. For the first 2 months, Troy bombarded her with alternating messages of love and threats, the classic cycle of an abuser trying to maintain control. With Jennifer's support and a domestic violence counselor's guidance, Allison maintained no contact, eventually filing a restraining order when the messages became explicitly threatening. She found a job as an administrative assistant at a law firm, a position beneath her qualifications, but one that offered stability as she rebuilt her life. She attended therapy weekly, working through not just the trauma of her relationship with Troy, but the deeper issues that had led her to accept his manipulative behavior in the first place. 3 months after our cafe conversation, Allison called and asked if we could meet again. This time she looked like herself. The dark circles gone, her posture straight, her eyes clear. She handed me a handwritten letter. "I want you to read this," she said. "I've been working on it with my therapist. It's everything I need to say to you." The letter was a detailed, unflinching apology. She acknowledged specific incidents of disrespect, the gradual erosion of boundaries, the entitled attitude she had developed. She took full responsibility without blaming Troy, though she recognized his negative influence. Most importantly, she expressed understanding of how deeply her actions had hurt me, showing true empathy rather than just regret for the consequences. I don't expect this to fix everything, she said after I finished reading. "I know I broke your trust, and trust takes time to rebuild. But I want you to know I'm committed to doing that work however long it takes." Since then, we've been carefully rebuilding our relationship on new, healthier terms. We meet for lunch every other Sunday, neutral territory, where we can talk openly. She's never asked to borrow money, though I did offer to help when she found an affordable apartment of her own 3 months ago. She insisted on signing a formal agreement to repay the security deposit and first month's rent over 6 months, making payments on time without reminders. The woman sitting across from me at those Sunday lunches is increasingly reminiscent of the daughter I raised, but with a new maturity and self-awareness that had been missing before. She listens more than she speaks. She asks about my life with genuine interest. She respects the boundaries I set without complaint. Last month, I finally invited her to my condo for dinner. Watching her take in my new home, I saw appreciation in her eyes, not calculation. "This place suits you perfectly, Mom," she said, noticing the details that reflected my personality. "I'm so glad you found it." We're not fully healed yet. There are still moments of tension, old patterns that threaten to resurface. But we're both committed to this new relationship we're building, one based on mutual respect rather than obligation or entitlement. As for the lessons I've learned through this painful journey, they are etched deeply in my heart. I've learned that love without boundaries isn't really love at all. I've learned that sometimes the kindest thing you can do for someone is to hold them accountable. I've learned that age doesn't diminish my right to respect and dignity. I've learned that it's never too late to stand up for yourself, to rebuild, to begin again. Most of all, I've learned that home isn't about walls and roofs and rooms. Home is the space you create within yourself, where you feel safe, valued, and at peace. No one can take that from you unless you allow it. If my story resonates with you, I hope it gives you courage to examine your own relationships and ask whether they're truly built on mutual respect. Sometimes the hardest decisions lead to the greatest freedom. What boundaries might you need to set in your own life? Have you experienced similar treatment from family members? I'd love to hear your thoughts in the comments below. And if this story helped you in any way, please like, subscribe, and share with someone who might need to hear it. Thank you for witnessing my journey, and remember, it's never too late to reclaim your dignity and write a new chapter in your story.